Meeting will come to order. Again, I apologize for being late. We have a lot of business to take care of today, so we'll get started. House Bill 29 by Representative Hurd. Mr. Hurd, you recognize to explain your bill to the committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I want to first of all thank you for working with me on this bill. Also Chairman Stevenson and the Department of Revenue and Jeremy and other members that have had a say-so in this bill. I bring to you today by committee substitute House Bill 29. This bill has drastically changed since we first introduced it on last year. One of the major changes in this bill is that previously, under the Tax Amnesty Program Act, we had included property tax. Property tax is no longer included in this bill. It's basically income tax. And I'll kind of go through the bill with you briefly. Section 1, starting on, let's say, line 12, and it states that the Commission shall develop and administer an additional one-time tax amnesty program as provided in this chapter. The Commissioner shall, upon voluntary return or remission of taxes and interest owed by the taxpayer, waive all penalties that are assessed and subject to being assessed for outstanding liabilities for tax period commencing or transactions occurred on or after January of 1991 and on or before December 31st of 2010. And it further states on line 21 that the additional tax amnesty program shall begin on October the 31st of 2012 and shall be completed no later than December the 31st of 2012. And of course, it states that, of course, all taxpayers owing taxes, penalties, and interest administered by the Commissioner would, of course, be accepted during that time period. As you turn over, just a couple corrections from the previous bill. On line 26, we changed the December 31, 1990 to 2010 amnesty period, and forms should be prescribed by the Commissioner. Lines 32 through 37, that basically has been refined to talk about the cost of the fees, the 20% of deficiencies assessed for any period between or a transaction occurred after December the 31st, 1990. And it also states that provided, however, that such collection fees shall not be imposed when the collection fees is imposed pursuant to subsection B of the code section. This was put in the bill just to kind of clear up some of the language that those individuals that didn't pay their taxes during this amnesty period still would be subject to the penalties and the interest that they owe. Further cleanup was on line 53, just basically states the period of January of 91 through December the 31st of 2010. And last but not least was on line 72, where it talks about this code section should not apply to amounts paid instead of taxes pursuant to the terms of the additional amnesty program. And Mr. Chairman, that's basically the bill. The fiscal note on this bill has come in at roughly, on a lower end, about $80 million, and a higher end of about 180 million, I think it is. Definitely those funds can be used by us right now at a time that we're dealing with our economy and with our budget.
Thank you, Representative Hurd. For members of the committee, all of the physical notes, including this one, are in one package. You have been used to seeing these attached to each bill, but in the interest of time, they all run together here. So if you would Any questions about physical notes? They're all in one packet. Representative Peak has a question.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Chairman, this isn't the first hearing. It's already been through committee. Is that right? Okay.
We're here in the bill. Yes,
Okay.
sir.
Representative Hurd, got a couple questions.
Sure.
Help me understand the process, the way this would happen. I'm a business. I think I may owe taxes, so I take the initiative with the Department of Revenue to find, or is this? I've already got an assessment. I have back taxes. We got a dispute, and this is my one-time opportunity to settle it. Is that the way it would work?
Yes, sir. That's your one time.
Okay. What if, for instance, I just recently settled a dispute and paid penalties and interest? Would there be an opportunity for the taxpayer to go back and collect his penalties that may be?
To my understanding, that will not, but of course the department will basically set forth those rules and regs.
Okay.
I would like to defer to the department if I could, Mr. Chairman,
Sure.
if that's okay.
That's all right. I can find out later, but I think that there may be instances where people, in fact, I have a particular case, I have a situation where you paid a penalty for something 6 months ago from an audit. Would the taxpayer have an opportunity to go back and settle up and get the penalty? Anyway, just
right.
That may be a question that comes up.
To my understanding, the department will set forth those guidelines and those rules as to how that would work.
Okay.
We kind of left it open for the department to do that.
Okay.
Yes,
Okay.
sir.
Representative Flood has a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Representative Hurd. I think the answer to Representative Peak's question is actually on line 16. It's for a period ending December 31st, 2010. So if someone had recently, in the last 6 months, had paid penalties, they would not be eligible. It would be for the tax period that ended December 31st, 2010. And Representative Hurd, a question for you. I think that you mentioned the fiscal note was $80 million to $180 million. That's a new revenue, not in cost to us, correct?
That is correct, sir.
Thank you.
Any other questions of the author by members of this committee? Representative Black.
I'm taking the same interpretation as Representative Thud down there. But when it says that they're voluntarily bringing forth stuff, an audit has already been started. That wouldn't be a volunteer. And so I think this is an opportunity that we might collect up a whole bunch of taxes out that maybe people know about, and they just have a chance to come in and pay up before they're faced with an audit. But if I'm wrong in that interpretation, I'd like some legal counsel to give us a more definitive answer.
Any other questions of the author? Not, what is the pleasure of the committee? Who do pass as a second? All in favor signify by saying aye. Opposed, like sign. Bill passes. Thank you, Representative Hurd.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, members of the committee.
House Bill 318, Representative Stevens.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is a bill for clarification on donated prepared food to nonprofit agencies, that is the homeless and others, to make sure that and clarify that they will not have to pay tax on this food that they are donating. This is a re-upping of a 2-year sunset.
Questions of the author? Seeing none, what's the pleasure of the committee? Motion made and seconded to do pass. All in favor signify by saying aye. Opposed, like sign. Thank you, Representative Stevens. Representative Stevens, House Bill 334.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is the food bank bill that also is a sunsetted bill. It carries it through 2015, provides for sales tax exemptions for food banks.
Questions of the author? Seeing none, what's the pleasure of the committee? Motion made and seconded. All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, like sign. This is not a broken record. Representative Stevens, House Bill 379.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The substitute House Bill 379 is the federally qualified health care centers. That is, again, an extension of a bill that's already been passed, and it carries it through 2015.
Questions of the author? Seeing none, what's the pleasure of the committee? Motion made, do pass. Second. Made and seconded. All in favor, signify by saying aye. Opposed, like sign. Thank you, Representative Stevens. House Bill 450, Representative Chuck Sims.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. This bill has been passed out of here, went to rules, and came back with and we tidied it up and strengthened the bill. Basically, what we have done here, again, for those folks that remember the bill, is that we allow the public housing authorities to garnish or basically ask for the tax return or the tax bill or the taxes that are sent back from anyone that has been in the housing authority home that owes the money or has torn up the building or whatever in that regard. Now, this is under due process. They still go through the due process. The other thing that has changed is that basically the housing authorities have a clearinghouse now, so that the department won't have to deal with 188 housing authorities. They will just have to deal with their one-time rule change, or excuse me, let me get this right. I'm going to make sure I'm saying it exactly right. The state association will act as the clearinghouse, and it'll file one time each year to the Department of Revenue, and with a $25 fee to the Department of Revenue. That way, that the Department of Revenue will only have to go to that one agency in order to get this outstanding debt returned back to those housing authorities. That's all that it does. It doesn't include all the others that, when it passed out of here before, we took all of that out. I'll stand for any questions.
Questions of the author? Seeing none, Mr. Pleasure. I'm sorry. Excuse me, Representative Howson.
I've got a quick question. When you said a $25 fee, is that on each? Is it a one-time fee that the department pays? Is it on each one they have to file on?
Yes. The fee is paid by the housing authority to the Department of Revenue in order to get this done. It costs money to get it done.
So it costs just $25 to get it done?
We're paying the housing authority is paying DOR to do it. There may be 25 different persons that they have to.
Each person they'll pay a $25
Yes, ma'am.
fee.
Yes, ma'am.
That's what I want to clear.
Individually. Yes,
Each
ma'am.
individual
They have to do
person.
that in order to
Okay.
get the thing
I
done.
just wanted to
Yes,
find
ma'am.
out if it's each individual person.
Yes, ma'am. Not just one time. Yes, ma'am.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Any further questions of members of the committee? Seeing none, what is it pleasure? Motion made and seconded. Do pass. All in favor, signify by saying aye. Opposed, like sign.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Representative Sims. House Bill 715, Representative Riley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I bring today a substitute to House Bill 715 that seeks to provide new requirements regarding contracts to collect municipal taxes. I've worked with representatives from GMA, ACCG, and the Tax Commissioners Association to put together a bill that will provide for all three parties to come to an agreement for municipal tax collection services that'll be transparent and will allow for appropriate compensations for the services provided. And I ask for your favorable consideration.
Representative Sims had a question.
As we discussed in subcommittee, and I still have that concern. Do you feel like that your bill now alleviates the problem that you had in your county with your tax commissioner about this, or you feel like that you feel pretty good about it at this time?
Yes, I think that it provides open dialogue so that all parties know exactly what is going to be provided and how compensation will be parceled out.
You understand, though, that the way the bill is now, that it leaves that contract, if that tax commissioner goes down there, both the collected taxes and the uncollected taxes, he can charge a commission for. You do know that.
I accept that, and I leave that to the good graces of the 3 jurisdictions to come to terms on how they believe compensation is best calculated.
I understand. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you.
Any further questions of the author? Seeing none, it's a pleasure of the committee. Do pass it. And second. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Opposed, like sign. Thank you, Representative Riley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
House Bill 743, Representative Rice.
Okay. Behind. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is a little bill that continues an existing exemption on the motor fuel tax for transit systems across the state. It's been re-upped twice now, and there's no cost to the state. Effectively, this is already recognized in the fact that the exemption has already been taken previously and does not deprive GDOT of the funds that are already in the budget.
Questions of the author? Seeing none, what's the pleasure of the committee? You do pass it. Second. Motion made and second. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, like sign. Thank you, Representative Rice. House Bill 818, Representative Parsons.
Thank you, Chairman. House Bill, the subcommittee substitute to House Bill 818. Currently, there's a income tax credit for the installation of what's titled clean energy property. As it relates to geothermal heating systems being put in, this just adds the most modern, most efficient type, which is a 3-phase geothermal heat pump system, and adds that to the definition. It doesn't change. There's a cap in place already. It doesn't cost the state anymore. It just adds that particular type, which is more efficient and more normally put into the larger installations in the code. And I think there's also some changes in the sub and committee that actually did change the cap, but that was the committee that decided to do that.
Questions of the author? Hearing none, what's the pleasure of the committee? Move do pass it as second. Motion made and seconded. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, like sign. Thank you, Representative Parsons. House Bill 851, Representative Rice.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Oops. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. House Bill 851 is a population bill. Basically, it's with regard to DeKalb, Gwinnett, Cobb, and Fulton. It maintains the status quo based upon the population increase.
Questions of the author? Hearing none. Whoop.
Yes, sir.
Representative Taylor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So this bill, the wording, I've never seen the wording like this in a population bill that sort of bifurcates the population. So I'm just trying to figure it out, Mr. Chairman, so if the author could help me. 690,000 to 700,000 would include, I'm just trying to figure out which counties are included and excluded in this population area.
DeKalb and Fulton would both be at 4% on the intangibles. Cobb and Gwinnett would be at 6%. That maintains the current status of what they're doing.
So is there any reason that not to make them all the same? I'm trying to. Is there a reason why Fulton and DeKalb would collect less than Cobb and Gwinnett? Is there some rational reason why?
The rational reason historically was that the Fulton County banks had a desire to see the intangible fees lowered because of the transactions they were doing on deeds and closings and things like that. And that has historically been the case going way, way back. This law is very, very old. And it's just been maintained that way. When DeKalb had the opportunity to change that back in 2000, they either didn't know or they didn't care or they didn't do it. Anyway, they went to 4% back in the 2000 time frame and have stayed there ever since. And the intention of this bill was only to preserve the status quo as requested by Cobb and Gwinnett.
Have you had any discussions with the folks at Fulton and DeKalb to see if they like the 6%, if they'd rather be treated the same as their
That they'd rather be
counties?
treated at 4%?
Or if they'd rather be treated the same as their neighboring counties?
You know, I'm sure that might be the case, but I haven't heard anything from this committee that would alter the framework of this bill.
I heard something today from Fulton County express some interest to me in just having equity among all 4 of these counties. And so if the chairman would be willing to maybe work with me before it gets to the floor, if you would. I'd love to get it back to, I think, where 851 was originally, rather than treating these counties differently.
Mr. Chair, I'm always willing to work with you.
Like,
Mr. Black has a question.
This would be more addressed to our lawyer, but is it not so that these population bills cannot be amended except amended numbers in order to keep the same counties in them and applicable to them?
That is correct. The only other alternative is to repeal the population feature altogether. So those are the 2 things that could be done.
So Fulton and DeKalb couldn't be brought in.
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you.
Is there further questions of the author? Not, what's the pleasure of the committee? Motion made and seconded to do pass. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, like sign. 2 noes. Bill passes. House Bill 846, Representative Knight.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is a bill that was brought to us by the department. There's 3 sections to the bill. The first section deals with the authority to redact and publish taxpayer letter rulings. This is very, very good news for tax preparers, for taxpayers, those who are in charge of compliance. Allowing the department to do this provides much more resources to the public as to the department's position on tax matters. So very much something I know as a CPA, very much support, and I know very helpful in the compliance issue. The second issue on section 2 of the bill deals with notification of sale. This is conduction of a sale for personal properties via public auction. And again, let me make sure we understand this is after a due process where somebody has failed to pay their tax bill and has everything's been adjudicated and their property has been taken. Basically, what's happened is the department is I guess under an old set of rules and is wishing to allow for the commissioner and a little, I guess, leeway here to make sure that we're trying to get the most we can from the property that has been seized. That's not only good for the state, but it's probably good for the person whose tax bill is trying to be offset with the property that is being sold. I know there was an example of where there were some items down in South Georgia and somebody came in and bought them for $1 a piece. And the auctioneer asked them, "What are you going to do with them?" "I'm going to put them on eBay for $20 a piece." So again, items, situations like that, where maybe that property is being sold in a part of the state that there is no market for, and maybe we can help the department get to a situation where they can sell it, and it's recouping more of the money that is owed to the state. And then the third one has to do with the electronic execution of tax liens, or doing it in an electronic form, again trying to get the department into the 21st century. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I'll be happy to answer any questions. If not, I'll ask for the committee's favorable consideration.
Representative Sims has a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Vice Chairman, as we discussed in committee the other day, I'm still a little bit confused as to if the taxes are owed to the county, say $1,000 in taxes are owed to the state, $200 in taxes are owed to the county, and the property sells for $1,000. Does the county get reimbursed That's the issue that I have is because as far as the precedent, I guess the state would take precedent than the counties, than the cities. That's the only issue that I have with the whole thing. I just wanted to make sure the counties are made whole too.
I think I'm right in saying this, and I think it's the issue in which the liens were placed.
Okay.
All right. And again, you may want to double check that.
Well, I was told yesterday that before anything, child support came before anything, and then it came on down. But there and again, I just wanted to know the method. That's my only concern.
Any further questions of the author? Seeing none, what's the pleasure of the committee? Move to pass the second. Do pass the second. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, like sign. Thank you, Representative Knight. House Bill 864, Representative Harvin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. This is a simple bill that just says that a retailer who is advertising that they are paying the tax on a purchase then must remit that money to the state, and if they're advertising they're paying any portion, they must remit that back to the state. So it's just ensuring that our taxes are being paid, and if the retailer wants to advertise such, then they have to actually be the one to remit them and not the purchaser. That's very simply all we're doing.
Questions of the author? Seeing none, what's the pleasure of the committee? Move to pass the second. Move made and second. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, like sign. Thank you, Representative Harvin.
Thank you.
House Bill 916, Representative Knight.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is a change to the CUVA bill. We've had situations where I'm sure many of you have heard it from your constituents. There's been valid ag use of property, and somehow at the local level, these people with valid agricultural uses have been denied admittance into CUVA or denied as they reapply for that. So we've made some changes to CUVA. We've worked very hard at this bill. We've worked with the Forestry Association. We've worked with the county commissioners, and we've made some changes, and I'll briefly go over those changes. One change is that page 2, line 36, we provide an exclusion for the underlying property. Basically, we're saying, hey, the house that you sit on, that shouldn't be up on a CUVA. That's a personal residence, and I think that's the original intent of the bill. Page 5, lines 136 through 142, we're striking or moving to strike the county's ability to set a minimum of up to 25 acres to be eligible to enter into CUVA. Basically, we've got some counties out there that said, hey, we don't want to play. We're refusing to play. And I don't think that's the spirit of what we originally had passed here. And so we're going to move, we're removing that 25 acre amount. Page 5, line 154 changes the minimum provisions to get into CUVA from 10 to 25 acres, again, to 10 to 25 acres. And that the authority to request additional relevant records regarding the proof of a bona fide conservation use. Page 5 provides that the owner, and I think this is the heart of the bill, provides proof that he or she has filed an IRS form, Schedule E, reporting farm-related income or loss, or Schedule F with the 1040 and the applicable Form 4835. That this is proof regarding a bona fide use of agricultural property, and that's the heart of the bill. A tax assessor prior to denial of the eligibility under this paragraph shall conduct and provide proof of a visual on-site inspection of the property. And I think it's very important to put in there. I think a lot of people had not been going out and inspecting, and I think this will help clear up any conflict. And then finally, we're adding in the provision that we added into FLIPA. I think it was last year this committee did. Basically, the contiguous property. In other words, somebody buys contiguous acres, they're going to be allowed to enter that property into the existing CUVA for the remainder of that CUVA period. And that's the bill. I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Questions of the author? Seeing none, what's your pleasure? Moved and second to pass. All in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, like sign. Thank you, Representative Knight. House Bill 994, Representative Lindsay.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. House Bill 994, for those of y'all who've been here for a little while, you may recall that in 2003, Georgia adopted a bill that provides preferential property assessment procedures for environmentally contaminated property. The goal being to encourage folks, oftentimes in urban areas, but also in suburban and even rural areas, to redevelop brownfield areas by providing certain tax incentives to that developer to come in and clean it up and then put on the property some viable commercial property. What has happened, and basically it's a 10-year period in which they provide certain preferential treatment. The problem has come up, and something that we didn't anticipate in 2003 was something like what we've seen over the last 3 or 4 years when it comes to an economic downturn that has stalled a lot of different commercial property development. And in case you're wondering, does this have a particular meaning to my district? Yes, it does. For those of you who've been in Buckhead and been at the corner of West Paces Ferry Road and Peachtree Road, you'll see this huge hole that's sat there. It hasn't been developed in 3 or 4 years. Moved in 3 or 4 years. Using that as an example, they did apply, as they probably should have. They've done the necessary work, but the problem is they're not going to be able to get the full use, if we can get it up and going again, of the tax abatements because of the stall in the construction. Now, it's not just, I'm using that as an example because there are other properties around the state that have faced a similar situation where there's been a stall in development because of the economic downturn. All this bill does is it allows an owner who stopped construction for more than 6 months and later resumed construction to add 1 year to the preferential assessment period for each year of construction delay up to a total of 5 years. This is simply just taking into account something that we didn't necessarily take into account in 2003 because we didn't expect to see the kind of economic downturn that we have seen.
Questions of the offered by members of the committee? I see none. What's the point? Yeah, I'm sorry. Excuse me. Jim Rice has a question.
I've never gotten a satisfactory answer to this question, but it's just hard to believe, Mr. Whip, that Buckhead is the site of a brownfield. I mean, you know,
Well, yes.
I've heard it called a lot of things, but never a brownfield. Good
Well,
bill, Mr. Lindsay.
Truth be known, we're like every other part of the state sometimes. We don't like to admit it, but we are. But I'm sure Peachtree Corners has no such property.
Any further questions of the author? Now, what's the pleasure of the committee? Move to pass in a second. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Opposed, like sign. Thank you, Representative
Thank you,
Lindsay.
Mr. Chairman. Appreciate it.
House, for members of the committee, House Bill 1027 has been pulled from the agenda for today. House Bill 1071, Representative Houston.
House Bill 1071 is a committee substitute, and House Bill 1071 does away with the lifetime license to sell cigarettes and puts a expiration date on the license. We're putting in an integrated tax system over at Department of Revenue, and we hope that by this integrated tax system and by having control over knowing who's selling cigarettes and who's that we can collect all the revenue that's due us. And also the thing that was added on page 11, Representative Peake had a bill that we put some of that in here. We're having trouble with illegal cigarettes being brought into this state and cigars, and it sort of defines the penalty. And we did change some of the penalties. If you don't have a license to sell cigarettes, it was changed from a penalty of $1 a day to $10 a day, and some of the penalties were made uniform.
So I think it would be true to say that in part this bill attempts to deal with the issue that Representative Peake had been trying to deal with, and y'all sort of work together as a team on this bill. Is
Yes.
that correct?
Yes, sir.
Questions of the author? Representative Taylor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So it takes the renewal fee from $50 to $10. Is that, am I reading that right? Or?
No, well,
I'm sorry, page 6, line
to get a
176.
cigarette license, there was no fee to get a license in Georgia to sell cigarettes and no expiration fee. So we really couldn't tell. You had lifetime license, and we really couldn't tell who had a license to sell cigarettes and who didn't. And so this bill puts an expiration and charges a fee if you want a license to sell cigarettes. And we put the renewal fee at the same time. If you have a license to sell alcohol, you can renew both of these at the same time. And the renewal fee for a dealer to sell cigarettes is $10 for renewal fee. This was there was none. There was a $50 fee in the original bill. The committee changed it to a $10 fee to sell cigarettes, and we just felt like it had to be some kind of monetary fee to make people feel like it was important.
Do you know what this is in other states?
Yes, we did have the Southern Legislative Conference research people did the research on other states. I don't, most of the time it's a $50 fee. I don't have those things with you, but I do have the report from other states, and we did research it in other states. And this will just give us a tighter control to see who's supposed to be selling cigarettes and see if they're paying taxes. We did not realize at the time, apparently this bill was written a long time ago. When you think about a fine being $1 a day, it had to be a long time ago.
Any further questions of members of the committee? Seeing none, what is the pleasure? Motion made and seconded to pass. All in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, like sign. Thank you, Representative Houston. To members of the committee, this completes our agenda for today. We will be having a call meeting on Ways and Means tomorrow, probably on adjournment. The chair does not anticipate a whole lot of bills, but we probably will have 2 or 3 or 4. Depending on what happens between. I want to thank members of the committee for their attendance. We had great attendance today, and thank the staff for getting ready for this meeting. We stand adjourned. Thanks.